if you're an investor in Canadian oil and gas stocks, then I've got some huge news for you that is going to impact your portfolio. Today, we're going to talk about some government announcements, industry announcements. I've got a couple of hints and leaks of things that are going to happen over the next couple of weeks. And of course, I have a couple of companies that I want to point out that are going to be big winners based on the stuff that we know right now. So first and foremost, if you didn't see the news, Carney let slip in a podcast earlier on Friday that there are going to be pipelines. He said, and I quote, "Pipelines are going to happen." And he said a new pipeline project, which all of that huge news, right? The idea is a 1 million barrel a day pipeline to the northwest coast of BC could provide a significant amount of Canadian resource at a much higher global price, going directly to the refineries in Japan, refineries in Korea. And I've seen some hints that this is like very likely to happen based on investment strategies going on over there. We've seen major investors there investing in the refinery capacity to refine heavy crude. Makes a lot of sense that they'd be looking to get that from Canada, considering we're the closest supplier, and they're cutting off deals with Russia. So there's been some hints at that, right? When we saw Carney there and then we saw these announcements happen, it seemed like maybe he was suggesting to international partners that was going to happen. But of course, when you see hints like that, it's nothing worth reporting on. When you see hints like this, when he says it to the crowd in like a fun, jovial way, as in like, be excited, that's important. But it's even more important, the timing of this, because not only does he say this a week out from the Grey Cup, a week out from his big announcement of his next tranche of major projects, but he is also saying this in tandem with some significant moves happening right here in Alberta. Now, if you didn't see this piece of news, Ottawa and Alberta are in formal talks right now to reset the relationship after years. And when I first saw this news, and I strongly recommend you read the article, same as the article for the Carney announcement there, because there's some details that are important. And depending on where you are and what you're invested in, there might be other details in there. But specifically for us in oil and gas here, the details with this Alberta-Ottawa relationship are pretty scarce. Nobody's willing to talk about it, but they do lean positive. And I can say without, naming anyone or saying that their information is 100% correct, based on the people I've talked to who work here in Alberta, work in the government, who have at least, heard whispers or rumors of this happening, it seems that there is going to be a positive memorandum of understanding published in the next week. I think you're looking for that before next Friday. And so that's huge, first and foremost. They've also suggested that there's some positive momentum going, not only in the space of, maybe a deal on oil, but they've also talked a lot about natural gas. There's a lot of positive momentum around natural gas. I would look to that as a big boost. There's a lot of positive momentum around the whole data center story and the natural gas story sort of in collusion with each other. There's also this like tandem LNG story going on. There's been a lot of positive talk about that. That's been the whispers, the hints. As far as the carbon capture and the oil pipeline, it doesn't seem, based on the people I've talked to, that they know where that's going. So again, unnamed sources, you can't really trust. These are people that just sort of might know, but there's definitely something happening, some big momentum. And seeing this in tandem with that Carney announcement makes me think that maybe at least there's a chance. We've also seen some positive momentum from the Alberta government, who love to call out the federal government. They haven't in the last week. There was a new budget announced, right? You would expect the Alberta government to speak out and be like, hey, we don't like this new climate competitive strategy, but they didn't. And that's big. And again, people who work in messaging for the Alberta government are positive on this. They think something as big is happening. It's all very much behind closed doors. So the public information, even the information we can get from leakers and people who, can talk about this stuff sort of on the low, there isn't much out there. But there is going to be an announcement in the next week. We're looking for a memorandum of understanding. It's going to reset the relationship, as in it's directed more positively towards oil and gas. And I think that could have a structural change on the market. We could see a re-rating, and that would be very interesting to see. Obviously, we don't know 100% where it's going to go, what's going to happen, or even if it's going to get signed, right? There could be some last minute challenges because it's not done yet. But very interesting happening in tandem with that Carney announcement earlier. So where does this leave us? Well, it basically leaves us in a situation where within the next week, there's going to be major government announcements that are going to have a massive impact on definitely, okay, I shouldn't say definitely, but almost certainly have a boost for the natural gas market here in Canada. There's going to be momentum and pressure and some sort of positive movement specifically for natural gas. But it's also very possible that we see a new pipeline, and that could bring a huge amount more runway, a huge amount more growth for Canada's oil majors. And that's a very interesting story, because a lot of these oil majors we've seen sort of stalled out over the last little while. The price of oil is down a lot. I think it's an accumulation time. I've been sort of championing that story that this is the time to buy. You want to buy against the cycle, right? I think a lot of people agree with that. Guys like Rick Rule have been out there saying the exact same thing. If you check out his portfolio right now, the things he suggested in Canadian oil and gas, basically we own the same thing. So I think we're both on that plan. I think basically everybody who's a longer term investor in the space is interested in that, man. And I think this could be a big mover because again, you move that sort of growth into play, you move that runway there for some of these companies. And again, you have this potential movement upwards in the price of the commodity, as well as the amount of production they can do. All of that is super good for the Canadian oil majors. And of course, when you're talking Canadian oil majors, I think you have to look at CNQ. Right? First and foremost, anybody can fill production growth. Anybody has positioned themselves with as many oil sands assets as possible. Anybody's even in pole position to acquire whatever assets are out there. It is CNQ. So big mover there. However, I do also think there's a couple of interesting things to note when we talk about the potential for a new pipeline. The first thing I would note is the fact that Enbridge seems to be bowing out of the story for now. And I think that means that it is maybe less likely that Northern Gateway, or whatever we call it, is the pipeline that will happen. I think it might be more likely to see that Southern pipeline, right? But I don't know 100%. Enbridge just made a big announcement just before the Carney announcement saying they do not want to apply for a national interest project as they tackle their expansion. So there's no national interest project for the mainline expansion, but interesting that they would put that news out there to immediately be followed by the Prime Minister saying you're building a pipeline. You would think largest pipeline company in Canada would be tied to this. I don't know if that's bullish or bearish if you're an Enbridge investor. I mean, I think Enbridge has found a huge amount of growth south of the border. I mean, as an investor, somebody who owns the shares and earns the income, I'm happy with that. But it is interesting because then it speaks to, okay, if they're not interested, who will be? Or is this going to change their mind? So I would pay attention to that, see what we see out of Enbridge over the next little while, right? If we see something from them, okay. But if not, then maybe you're looking to somebody else to be a leader here and to be providing some more funding or whatever it might be. And if you're talking about somebody else who might provide leadership, if Enbridge is bowing out, then you might be talking about TC. And while TC has kind of stepped out of the oil game, I do think that this kind of lines up with a lot of the chatter I'm hearing about the positive momentum in natural gas, right? And you do see TC Energy has been basically like bull. We've seen analyst re-ratings. We have seen significant momentum. Stock price isn't necessarily going anywhere, but as an income producing stock, they are talking about significant growth. They talked about something crazy, we saw this announced earlier, but it could be up to like 40 BCF of growth in natural gas demand in North America over the next 10 years. I think Eric Nuttall had a chat about this in his recent video. He talked about like 4 BCF a year, 4 BCF per day to be specific, a year. So that's a 4 billion cubic feet of demand every single day, every single year for the next 10 years. Where does that growth come from? Who knows, right? And that's an interesting question. TC is also saying the same thing. So you're hearing this, right? You're hearing this, TC is putting it up front. TC is saying it to guys like Eric. You're seeing a lot of this positive momentum in natural gas. Maybe we're going to see some sort of major natural gas announcement, major sort of announcement like that. Or maybe this is going to be a part or the big thing that happens up front because it's a little bit easier. It's the space right now, I think. It's a lot easier politically. It's maybe a lot easier to get the funding for that because a lot of people are investing in that. And with like oil as a secondary source in this new MOU that's coming out in the next week, maybe you see some sort of LNG component at the Port of Churchill, right? I mean, we saw Tourmaline sort of hint at that in their earnings report just last week. So interesting stories going on there. Very, very interesting. I am bullish on TC. I don't own the shares. I own the producers in natural gas, not necessarily the midstream, but do own Pembina. So I do think natural gas midstream definitely has some potential. Very interested to see if TC ends up being a partner for another sort of natural gas pipeline deal. Very interesting to me. Also interesting to me if we see some sort of natural gas pipeline to the States. I think maybe in combination with the Keystone style pipeline, that'd be interesting. We saw a lot of people talk about this sort of storyline. I think even Mike Rose of Tourmaline mentioned an Alberta to either Texas or sort of Alberta to the middle of the U.S. Gulf Coast area, right? Throughout that sort of belt of demand they've got for natural gas down there in order to supply longer term natural gas in the case that Permian gas does start to dry, not in the next 5, but the 5 years after that. But I do also think that there's huge momentum for stocks that balance and have a significant amount both of Montney exposure and of oil exposure, that have an amount of condensate exposure to fill new pipelines. And this is where we get into 2 stocks that I think you should keep an eye on over the next week, because if they react hard, if they move 2, 3, 4, 5% on the news. It'll give you a sense of what industry thinks is going to happen and what the institutional investors think is going to happen. And I would keep an eye on Whitecap. I would keep an eye on ARC. And of course, I'm going to be keeping my eye on Tourmaline, because I think that Tourmaline and C&Q being the scale players is probably the place that I want to put my money in if I believe in a long-term story of growth in demand. Because if you think demand is going to ramp for years, decades maybe, then you want to own the players that have the largest amount of resource. And of course, those are the largest players. You can argue with me every single day, all day, about if they're the best companies in the space, if they provide the most value for shareholders, if they provide the most cash flow up front or the best, free cash flow yield. I get it, right? I get that they aren't necessarily the best value companies, but I think if you're holding for a very long term and you're playing that game, then having the most resource might make sense. However, I think Whitecap and ARC are probably going to move faster, probably going to move harder, right? A bigger move in either direction. I think they're more directly exposed to this kind of marginal growth in the industry, and I think that you should pay attention. And honestly, with all that being said, I'm very interested to see this next week. I strongly believe that investors should pay attention to what's going down, and I want to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Are you investing in any of these spaces? Do you believe that we're going to see some significant announcements come out in the next week? And what do you expect to see? Please do leave that in the comments below. As always, if you like this video, you like what we do here on the channel, please do like it. If you like talking about these Canadian topics that don't get as much news coverage, please do subscribe. And I hope I see you in the next one.